Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is R.J. Blake, the Chief Executive Officer of the Blake Wilson Group. R.J., good to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here.
And you deal in federal finances, federal financial management, and you have kind of a different view of it, maybe an unconventional view of what the issues are. Let's talk about the Defense Department, which, aside from the fact that it can't get a clean financial audit, has a multiplicity of financial systems, a lot of redundancy to do the same thing, and you've kind of thought about this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we approach the Department of Defense and intelligence community both together in a similar way. They're for the most part in the same place. Myself and our leaders in that practice are former warfighters, right? So we've been able to see on both sides.
The tooth and the tail.
Exactly right. And so I think that gives us a unique perspective to think about meeting the programmatic goals and the mission for the nation, as well as stewardship of the taxpayer dollars. Other companies recognize this. This is not some revolutionary thought, but I think it's our approach and how we show up as a fast-growing small business to tackle that challenge.
What do you think their main challenges are? Because it's just big and bureaucratic and has very old systems and processes.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things going on. I think one of the issues is sort of the spend to obligation problem. Use it or lose it is one of them. I think it depends when you ask that question, right? From 9/11, which changed and shaped our world and country certainly. There was just focus on mission, warfighter, nothing else matters. And there's a lot to be said for that, and we can respect and appreciate that. And it depends on the initiatives of the administration, where a lot of times those things take a backseat, right? Audit readiness, audit sustainment. These are things that are after the fact. The accounting and the recording of those financial transactions are an afterthought, when really they should be thought of up front. But oftentimes the right people are not in the right rooms thinking of this when we plan for the spending, and then we go execute on that spend. So there's a ton of things going on there, but that's sort of what I would say today, being asked that question.
Sure. And then you also operate in the civilian side, which has the problems of fraud, improper payments that seem to just be impervious to reform year after year.
Oh yeah, fraud, waste, and abuse. And I won't pick on any one agency, but our first prime contract was at an agency that had a whistleblower. There were some congressional inquiries, and you're talking about maybe one program manager, let's say, spending $120 million. We were only able to verify and validate about $4 million of that spend. The rest was waste and abuse, meeting obligation rates, or all sorts of things where, and a lot of times it's not one person or a nefarious act. It's just the way the system is sort of designed. And so they need help as well. And at the end of the day, whether it's defense, national security, or federal civilian, these are taxpayer dollars that are being used. And I think every one of our team members, and especially senior leaders, we wake up every day thinking about this. These are taxpayer dollars. You don't get to choose whether you pay your taxes or not. And so that should be honored, and we need to help the government be stewards of those taxpayer dollars, and us included. So.
And what are some of the virtues, say, a small business like yours can bring relative to the traditional places that agencies go for their financial management and financial management systems updates and so on?
Yeah, so I think what makes us different, right? What is our pitch? What is special about us, and what would the client, what value add do we provide? And I would say it goes back to our values and our mission and who we are as an organization and our culture. That's easy to say. A lot of companies say that, but really what's important is we are a people organization, and our people are experts in this field, and they care. But really, I think it's back to our mission, where we harness technology to improve financial stewardship.
And just maybe talk about the specific services you offer.
Yeah.
Both, because you have a technical side and an advisory side.
Yeah. So we approach every client and agency with, how can we solve their problem? First, it's what is their problem? versus, hey, let's generate revenue as an organization, let's be profitable. Okay, they need butts and seats. We take a different approach with what is the real problem that they have, whether we have to read between the lines or not, and then can we solve that? There are many things that we can and we'll say no to, but when we ask ourselves, can we solve it, we go to the drawing board with what's the best way, the easiest way that allows us to be profitable so we're a going concern, but also solves the agency or the directorate or office's problem in an efficient way that doesn't necessarily require us to be there forever and always. And so that's technology, right? Technology could be a process. It's not just a software. We have software partners. They're amazing. We do great things together. We partner with the big firms as well. But really what makes us different is our people. And I think in a small business where innovation thrives, right? You see a lot of large businesses acquiring small businesses. Why? It's for their innovation. We're cognizant of that, but where does that innovation really come from? I think it's getting the right people on the bus with the shared values, and they have to be competent and experts in their field. We have that, and it's my job to really fuel that, to pour into that. And so some of the ways that we do that with technology are anywhere. So all practices in financial management, whether it's budget, execution, formulation, audit readiness, audit sustainment. We have former auditors. The CPAs, I think in the easiest sense, it's thinking about we have CPAs that are supported by technologists. Either they themselves are also kind of a hybrid, or we have a technology arm within the company where it's software developers that understand how to build from scratch based on an idea and needs, where we get in the room together, and it's sort of that fintech kind of approach. But it could be as easy as the low code, no code, where the client already has the software or the technology at their fingertips with Microsoft Office. We just have to turn it on and show them how to use it and sort of build that out. And we've done that when in situations where they didn't have the money to go spend to get the software, and we were able to get them exactly what they need, and they were sort of blown away at what they had right at their fingertips.
Yes, sometimes they all buy a set of violins, but they don't really know how to play them into anything.
And then they hear the sound, and I didn't really want a violin, actually. I don't like that sound. Maybe I want this. So.
And do you find that when you are approached by a company or you make a pitch to a federal agency as a company, do you find that the people in there actually know what their issues are?
That's a great question. A lot of times I don't think they do, right? They're civil servants. This is an amazing thing. Most of the folks that are within Blake Wilson Group have been in uniform or civil service as well. So that's a really important role. But what happens is they're not always experts, whether they're the core, the program manager, or the contract officer that's writing it. They are not always the experts. And then you have new technologies and things that there aren't experts in it yet, right? People will say they are, but they're not. And I often think of the story of the horse to Model T scenario, right? Where if you're a client, you're like, I want a horse, and then how could maybe we could give you a faster horse. Well, with what we try to do, it's coming up with that innovative idea to say, you don't even know what you need yet, but there's this thing called a Model T, and we want to be the ones to provide that to you.
Right, you're citing Henry Ford, who said if I asked what my customers wanted, they'd say a bigger horse instead of a motor in front.
Yep.
And you mentioned the phases of financial management, and it sounded a lot like planning, programming, budgeting, and execution, PPBE. We all know the virtues and the pains that brings to the Pentagon. Sounds like you have people that have lived with PPBE themselves.
Yes.
And so there sounds like without a complete revolution in how they do business, it's possible to make that work more adeptly maybe, or more agilely for the department and for units in the department since none of us have the power to take PPBE out altogether.
Yes. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think a lot of the things we've seen downstream from the audit impact where, the agencies that can't get a clean opinion or have a lot of material weaknesses and significant deficiencies, which include the civilian agencies, it's really important to think about, okay, what are those downstream effects and how could they have been prevented? In a lot of organizations and companies that support those are putting Band-Aids on the issue, or they're just in survival mode, right? It might not be intentional. We like to take a step back and think about, okay, how did this happen? And oftentimes it's because there's maybe not an accountant that knows the downstream impacts in the room during that phase, PPB&E phase. And so what we're currently working on, and I'll just say TBD and stand by, we're working on some technology that could address those issues up front without having to have an accountant in the room at every single step.
Yeah, the only thing worse than a lawyer in the room at every step is an accountant in the room at every step, I guess, right?
I would agree with that, and I am a licensed CPA, so I think it's fair that I could agree with that.
Yeah, and that's a good question. You are a combat veteran.
Yes.
And of all the things that a lot of combat veterans choose, you chose the CPA route.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of your own background, how you came to doing
sure.
this of all things.
Oh goodness, I could have never predicted this would have been my journey back then, but life shapes us in these interesting ways. So I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I think I can trace back my days to where I was 8 years old, flipping baseball cards or selling golf balls that fell into the pond or whatnot. And I learned that I could earn $1. I grew up with a single parent mom who was, we went without, but very resourceful. And I was able to model that and really chasing it, back to then. I've always been an entrepreneur and didn't know how to spell it or what the word meant until later years. Joined the Army at 18. Was in the reserves at first, also in college for electrical engineering, and then 9/11 happened. I decided to leave, and then ended up at 10th Mountain Light Infantry fighting in Afghanistan, which really gave me a perspective on humility and life and death and what is the why we do things. Got some leadership experience, and then had some injuries where I realized, I could no longer kick indoors or play Rambo. So I decided to go to business school, and actually an accounting professor came to me one day and said, you're an accountant. And I thought those were fighting words, but I realized I was actually good at it. And then I thought, how do I, bridge these two together? And actually two of the big four firms I supported, both in audit and consulting. One approached me realizing I had a clearance and had been in the Army, and thought, hey, we should stick him in over at the Pentagon and support these efforts. So that's really how I got started. And most of my friends that I served with still don't, to this day, believe that I'm an accountant and a licensed
accounting
CPA.
is a more creative and subtle profession, I think, than people outside realize.
Yeah.
But I'm imagining, too, the Army experience taught you that to get at these issues that federal agencies in DOD and civilian grapple with, it takes a team.
Yeah.
So you have to have the accountants, you have to have the financial manager controller function, which is not the same as accounting,
Yeah.
and then you have to have the program management,
Yep.
and sometimes the tech people.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It takes a village. And I think that's where, when you think about accounting actually being creative, I think when you do good accounting, or you think about, process and system, you have to understand your stakeholders. You have to understand the operational organization, which oftentimes is lost. Maybe on the auditors, or the standards they're so focused on, versus the impact and the why, and how did this come about. I think when we start to understand that, which from our perspective at Blake Wilson Group, we have that, right? So we have
Sure.
individuals that come from these organizations, both in defense and intelligence and civil servants.
And by the way, for the contracting officers out there, are you veteran-owned category?
Yes, yeah. So we're actually 8A. We're service disabled, veteran-owned, and then obviously check the small business box. We have that as a contract vehicle. It's a tool in the shed, but we certainly like to think of ourselves as an organization that adds value. So we want to stand on our own feet, whether it's unrestricted, and or small business set aside. We can kind of go after all of that work, and we're easy to get to.
My guest today has been R.J. Blake. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Blake Wilson Group. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Blake Wilson, that's Wilson with 2 L's, Blake Wilson Group.